Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This being the last presentation of the last session, I quietly asked the chair my time. I think it's 20 minutes, so 20 minutes, bear with me. The outline of the presentation, I'll be starting off with giving a brief idea of why is it so compelling for India to look at electric mobility. Not only India, globally. Why is electric mobility such a compelling way forward? Then a very brief insight into what we're doing in the National Mission for Electric Mobility and the mission document. And then move on to the last bit, which is around what we're talking in the mission document and what the implications would be for the BEV or electric vehicle infrastructure in the country and the way we are moving forward in this regard. So, as most of you would know, transportation sector accounts for 30% of worldwide energy consumption, and this is the second largest source of carbon dioxide emissions globally. Other very interesting fact is that transportation is one of the singularly most reliant sector for primary energy on fossil fuels. And road vehicles, if you look into transportation sector, road vehicles account for 3/4 of all the primary energy consumed. And what's happening on the automotive side? Well, an interesting fact, it took almost 95 years for first 500 million cars to come on, the passenger vehicles to come on the roads, and this is going to double in next 20. So what you're looking at is a phenomenal growth in automotive, hence a phenomenal growth in demand for fossil fuels. And this is one of the largest sectors that consumes fossil fuels. So demand is going to be increasing phenomenally. And what's happening on the supply side? Well, the supply is, there are people talking about the peak oil scenario situation with very limited new finds. The resources are concentrated globally in few countries. In fact, 86% of the proven reserves are with OPEC or Russia. There is limited spare capacity. So what you're looking at also is the last fact, but very important fact, the impact that fossil fuel use has on the environment. All these factors, the supply and demand side, when put together, will have a major impact on transportation sector and especially India. Why India? Because from now on onwards to 2030, 3/4 of the projected increase in oil demand is going to come from transportation sector, and 50% of that is going to come from China, India. As already mentioned by the chair in the beginning, India is a huge net importer of oil, 82% right now, and our projections show that will go up to 92% by 2020. So we're looking at huge import bills, we're looking at large fiscal deficits, we're looking at large current deficits, balance of payment issues. So it hits you in economic terms also in your growth story. Now, if you look at the slightly on the side of the environment, if you take the growth projections of how our cities are going to grow from now onwards to 2020, there is going to be almost 5 times growth in the transportation requirement. What that translates into, if you look at it in terms of carbon dioxide emissions, as per data from US Department of Commerce, by 2050, if you keep growing like this, you're going to reach a level of carbon dioxide parts per million, which will be completely unviable. So conclusion is, well, very simple. For energy security, especially for us here in India, and for mitigating the impact of the transportation on the environment, of course, transportation sector is critical, but within the transportation sector, what really is most important is the road sector. And it's not that, things are not being done. You have initiatives aimed at improving efficiency of vehicles, looking at, inspection and certification regimes for on-road vehicles, encouraging modal shift to public transportation. You have you can do better city planning and road infrastructure development, which will give you greater efficiencies, use of technology and incentives for behavioral changes, but all these things will not lead to any major benefit because you're not really changing the manner in which the energy is being used in this sector. It's going to be incremental change, and coupled with the fact that the growth in the next 8 to 10, 20 years is going to be phenomenal, you're not really going to have that kind of impact that you desire. So what you really need right now is something transformational, something that can change the paradigm completely. And that change will happen if you address the fundamental issue of primary energy source for transportation sector. Electric vehicles, we all know, are much, much more efficient as compared to the counterpart IC engine vehicles. In fact, the ratio is almost 6 times. And therefore, electric vehicles are very compelling for the way forward because they offer you a way to reduce the single energy source dependence on fossil fuels. They offer us a scenario where we can have tremendous increases in efficiency of vehicles, both for electric and hybrids. They provide us the ultimate link of using a range of sustainable renewable energy sources that will come up in the future. And obviously, if we go this path, this will help tremendously in mitigating the environmental impact of transportation and growth. So therefore, electric vehicles will help us shift to a transport paradigm that is highly efficient and compatible with sustainable renewable energy future. That's why this story, my dear friends, is so compelling. Now I talk about the national mission for electric mobility. I start off with the reason d'etat. Why are we doing this? What's the basic purpose of this mission? The basic purpose is that this mission is about an investment for our future generations. The national mission was approved some time back with creation of apex level structure, because there are so many players, there's so many ministries that are involved that have a key role to play. You need to get them on the same platform. And if you look at this entire initiative world over, it's an issue revolving around change management. It involves change how consumers are used to traveling and will need to travel. It involves change in the manner in which the manufacturers are used to manufacturing vehicles and technologies. It's also completely going to change the manner in which the government's going to react and bring in policies and the pace of these policies. So if it's a case of change management, you need top-level support. So the apex structure that we've created is the National Council for Electric Mobility, which is at the ministerial level. It's almost a, kind of a cabinet committee. It has the Honorable Minister for Heavy Industries as its chairman and ministers for all of the union ministries as its members. Below that is the functional level of the national board, which is headed at the senior-most levels, at the bureaucratic levels from all the stakeholder ministries, industry leaders, and academia on board. And serving the NBM and NCM is at present NATRIP, and subsequently it will be the National Automotive Board, which has been approved by the government. Like the chairman informed, the National Electric Mobility Mission Plan 2020, which is our roadmap, our vision, our mission plan, got unveiled by the Honorable Prime Minister on the 9th of January. Now, this mission plan is an outcome of in-depth study that we did, which lasted practically over 8 to 10 months. The snapshot of possibilities that we feel are there indicate that India has a huge latent demand for full range of electric vehicle technologies, including from mild hybrids to full electric. And if you look at the chart in terms of vehicle segments, while the entire possibility of demand overall is around 6 to 7 million, this will be primarily concentrated on around two-wheelers, because India really is a two-wheeler country. 4.8 million, and four-wheelers constituting around 1.6 to 1.7. This latent demand is for a 2020 scenario. And if you compare this with the similar projections that have been made globally for various countries, what we do get is a situation where India is going to be a very meaningful player, with the possibility, if things go right, to be amongst the top 3 markets for full range of electric vehicle technology four-wheelers, amongst the top 3 players, and amongst the top 2 players for the two-wheeler segment. Of course, this is latent demand, and A lot needs to be done before you get there. There are huge barriers that currently exist that need to be addressed. Broadly speaking, these are around consumer acceptability, from price to completely new technology, performance anxiety issues. Technology development itself is a huge challenge, especially for Indian industry. We are really laggards in terms of how much R&D has gone in and kind of patents that we've developed. We have to do catching up. Manufacturing capabilities, developing the local capabilities, because localization will give you the advantages of lower cost. And of course, infrastructure. That piece is very important, and that's why we're here today. In all of this, the government role is going to be absolutely critical, and collaboration with the industry is absolutely essential. And the policies have to be created, which can be used as instruments to achieve the desired end objectives. These policies are not going to be working unless you have a long-term roadmap. These policies are going to be stable for a long-term or mid-term basis, and all the stakeholders are on board along with clearly defined responsibilities and milestones. One beautiful thing about this entire mission is it's a huge collaborative effort with tremendous amount of involvement of the industry. In fact, it's almost a complete partnership where the entire mission plan has been developed jointly, completely jointly. So what we're saying is, if you need to realize the huge potential that we're talking of, the current large barriers that exist obviously will need to be addressed, where government role is going to be critical. And for that, you need to have a holistic approach, wherein the government will have to look at all the issues relating to demand creation, R&D, XCV, infrastructure, supply constraints. When it comes to demand creation, it's essentially going to be a government-led activity where the funding is going to come from government as incentives. In the R&D, the government will have to pitch in with its investments. There'll have to be joint effort by the industry to invest in development of newer products. In the infrastructure, what we feel is it has to be initially started with the government with investments in pilot projects, then developing these into viable business models which can then subsequently be taken on by the industry. Similarly, supply interventions is going to be largely industry with incentives coming in from the government. Now, if you look at the potential roadmap that we have developed for the plan, right now, as we speak, we are more or less in India in the infeasible stage. We believe that around 2015, we can reach the tipping point where viable solutions will be available to the consumers. If all goes well and we have our various interventions in place at the right time with the right focus, we believe the economically viable phase can be something around 2018, and subsequently we can move into a self-sustaining mode. Of course, for this to happen, you need to, again, do a lot of effort for creating consumer acceptability upfront. Along with this, kickstart the technology scheme, along with spurring local manufacturing and pushing people to invest in this space. And all along, you have to start working from the very beginning till the very end and much beyond on the infrastructure side. What does it mean in terms of resources, money? Well, our estimates put the entire investment close to 22 to 24,000 crore rupees over a period of 8 years. This does not include the amount of investment that will go in by the industry for putting in plants or developing products, etc. It's around the 4 interventions that I talked of. And if you want to divide that amongst the various vehicle segment categories that's given here in the chart, we believe this, I in the very beginning said this is an investment and not a subsidy scheme. Why I said that is because if you do an analysis simply based upon the kind of fuel benefits that you're going to get in terms of fossil fuel savings, which is indicated here in terms of million metric tons, what you're looking at is net positive NPVs for all these segments with huge amounts. So it's an investment. It's an investment that we need to make now. And the other piece, important piece, is since I had already mentioned the roles and responsibilities in passing in brief in the beginning, the actual financial impact for the government, investment from the government, will be close to 13 to 14,000 crore rupees, primarily in the area of demand creation, R&D, and infrastructure. The estimations regarding the kind of savings we're going to have, or the benefits we're going to have in emissions, show very significant improvements and significant gains. Mind you, we're doing a well-to-wheel assessment here. We're not talking about tank to wheel. We're looking at the impact not only from well to wheel, but we're also taking into account the manufacturing, the material part of it also. And this shows that there's going to be definitely huge amounts of benefits across the various technologies for volatile organic compounds, carbon monoxide, NOx. Obviously, the sulfur dioxide may go up because of the kind of power generation we have in the country. Now, in the last piece, what does this mean for infrastructure, charging infrastructure specifically, this intervention? I'll start by making some observations. Some of these are very obvious. Limitations of battery energy capacity and range anxiety amongst the consumers are two of the most critical things that make charging infrastructure vital for this intervention, especially for the pure electric adoption. The pure electric vehicle infrastructure is globally one of the most important interventions that governments all over the world are investing in. But the extent of the linkage between the availability of public infrastructure, charging infrastructure, and the adoption of XEV will vary. It will vary not only from one country to another, but it will actually vary from a city to city within each country. That basically is determined by the kind of demographic distribution patterns you have, the vehicle kilometers traveled that are very, very different. The difference is also going to be amongst the various vehicle segments. For instance, two-wheelers, our study tells us, are not that critically dependent upon charging infrastructure to be in place in the very initial periods. You can get a certain large volume out without actually charging infrastructure being there right there. But subsequently, obviously, you need that. Buses, for instance, public transportation, have a completely different need and a model. And within the vehicle, each vehicle segment, since consumers have different usage patterns, you have commercial vehicles, you have daily distance traveled, which are widely varying. Even within that, you're going to have huge variation. And globally, what we've seen is there are a lot of business models which have been adopted or kind of been tried out, from battery swap to fast chargers. And these approaches really have to be analyzed from your contextual setting because of the point that I made just before this point. So the concluding point here in this slide is that it's essential for each country to choose its own optimum strategy. You simply cannot pick a strategy from somewhere and say that that worked there and that will work in your context. No. Now, if you look at India, like the chairman already pointed out, we have power deficit, we have power generation efficiency issues, we have high level of transmission and distribution losses, we have a frequent overloading of system components. Till now, there has been hardly any little or no initiative for the charging infrastructure efforts. And from now on till future, as our economy grows, there is also going to be huge projected growth for demand for electricity. That's the context that we sit in today. In view of this, it's essential for us, before we make any strategy or make any roadmap for this piece, or before we start, we need to analyze the Indian consumer perceptions. What do they perceive? What does a consumer want? What does he think about this creature? That's important. He may not be right dot on right now, but that's important. What are the vehicle kilometer traveled that we have for different consumer segments in different vehicle segments? That's essential for the India relevant strategy. Then we need to look at the charging infrastructure requirements and the investments requirements, the implications of that, the impact of the projected demand for additional power requirements. How is that going to play out? And of course, we have to all along use the well-to-wheel impact analysis for any kind of gains that we talk about rather than tank-to-wheel. So we actually in our study did a very, very big consumer survey. We covered a huge number of consumers across all vehicle segments. And they were asked a number of questions. This is just a cull out from that. Now, this is a chart showing vehicle segment-wise responses. The three columns indicate the perception of the consumers on the issue of electric vehicle range compared to the traditional IC engine vehicles. The key barriers that they perceive would be there for adoption, and sensitivity analysis. If you change a bit, how does it impact? Now, well, most of the consumers, as expected, found that the electric vehicles are, pretty worse off as compared to IC engines in terms of range. So no great, finding there. But if you look at the three parameters we were talking about related to infrastructure and how consumers perceived it in terms of their relative importance, what you get is a prioritization saying that range is probably a bigger barrier than charging time, than charging infrastructure. Interesting. Now, this is from a consumer set group which 90 to 98% or even more perhaps have never driven an electric vehicle. So that's a very important learning here. And then from sensitivity analysis, you get the obvious confirmations that charging time for buses and three-wheelers is going to be critical. We topped this with also a survey on people who own electric vehicles. What do they think? The perceptions were quite varied. We used that along with a lot of focus group studies that we had undertaken with experts to arrive at an assessment of the additional power and charging infrastructure requirements, which we believe we would require for the kind of penetration levels that we're talking of by the year 2020. Now, what that shows is by 2020, for four-wheeler electric vehicles, we would need another 150 to 225 megawatts of extra power and an investment close to 752,000 crore rupees. This is coming from a mix that we believe would be the right. The mix is in terms of chargers, level 1, level 2, level 3, the distribution being 70%, 20 and 10%, and taking an average global price for these to arrive at the number. In terms of buses, the figures are that you would need around less than 5 megawatts of extra power and rupees 10 to 20 crore rupees additional for the investment for infrastructure, charging infrastructure that is. For LCV, it's around 10 to 20 megawatts extra power and 70 to 120 crores of charging infrastructure. And for three-wheelers, it's around 10 to 15 megawatts of extra power and 50 to 75 crores of charging infrastructure. When all this is put together, what we get is a chart that shows you what is the additional generation capacity segment-wise in two scenarios. One is the HEV scenario, which is with a lower level of offtake of pure electric vehicles. That's around 2 to 3% of the entire stock. And another scenario, which is the HEV BEV scenario, which are more aggressive offtake of electric vehicles, which is around 5%. The figures for additional generation capacity, when added up, come to something around 800 to 850 megawatts. The power infrastructure in terms of additional generation capacity, the investment that goes into that is close to 4,000 to 5,000 crore rupees, and the charging infrastructure is around 800 to 1,200 crore rupees. This estimation of the additional power generation and charging infrastructure suggests that additional generation capacity due to electric vehicles will not really be a very significant factor to look at or worrying thing. Most of the investments in the electric vehicle infrastructure, especially the power generation infrastructure, is going to come from the private investments. And as far as the charging infrastructure is concerned, the government investments will really have to be upfront initially to develop the pilot projects and the models where you can facilitate the private investments to come in. Now, the way ahead that we are planning, it's a phased approach. We believe that you need to have a suitable approach in the demand creation scheme so that it takes into account that you're going to have a gestation time period for the infrastructure to roll in. What that means is initially you could be looking at a more aggressive rollout of hybrids and lower range of BEVs, which do not really depend upon largely on your charging infrastructure. And then follow it immediately with initial government facilitation which is must to create the viable business models. Government will also need to ensure that standardization of vehicle to grid interface components and other charging infrastructure is put in place. We have already started work on this, and the group under BIS has started deliberating on this, and probably hopefully we'll have something by the year end or even earlier. We are trying to encourage and involve oil marketing companies and power utility companies to come on board and collaborate. In fact, we have PCRA, which is leading this particular part. We also believe that we need to have suitable amendments in existing laws which relate to building bylaws, which would mandate charging infrastructure in government and public buildings initially, then subsequently on commercial areas, parking areas, high-rise buildings, residential high-rise buildings, etc. Any other issue, very basic, for instance, when I talk about legal issues, is even the Electricity Act may have to be amended, or you need to get around it, because today you can't trade in electricity. So if you want to have charging infrastructure and you want to sell electricity through whatever means you want to, you can't do it. It's not legal. So you have to resolve those issues. So even those issues, those fundamental issues have to be addressed. What we're also doing is we're trying to do an impact analysis of high density pure electric vehicle on local transport transmission infrastructure. We're trying to assess the various models that are used abroad currently for their efficacy and usefulness in India, how you can adapt them, how you can change them. The various models we're looking at is battery swap, off-peak hour charging through smart metering, grid powering. Very little work has started in this. We're in the starting phases right now. So I think from that perspective, this event is really, really very useful. We're also looking at helping to build viable consortiums by rolling out the BEV public charging infrastructure in a big way. Establishing linkages to renewable energy generation, that's one of our very important concerns. We really want to roll this out and take it to the level of integrating it with the efforts that are happening in the renewable energy scenario in the country, where a lot of money is being invested and a lot of efforts are being made, and significant gains have already happened. Infrastructure will need to include things like end of life reuse and recycling of batteries, for example, especially lithium-ion batteries. You need to get that infrastructure in place if you're looking at large number of volume of vehicles coming in. We're undertaking most of these activities with all stakeholders, with key ministries like the Urban Development Ministry, PCRA, oil and utility companies, industry, both battery manufacturers, automotive industry, research organizations. And we're also currently trying to work on a pilot project with Delhi government as the first project that can take off. With that, I thank you for your patient hearing. Thank you.